I beg you to try it, Patricia.
Let me get this straight, Carla. You disagree on the weapon, you disagree on the number of blows.
Listen to me, Patricia. You dare once in your life.
So that was the Tears for Fears concert that I missed. They were in Toronto a couple of days ago. Anyway, this is Trish Wood. Trish Wood is Critical is the podcast. It's a podcast about critical thinking. And occasionally I get to reminisce about some of my favorite things in the whole world. And Roland Orzabal, who I had a big crush on. I always liked the nerdy ones. And Kurt Smith, namely Tears for Fears. It was a big band for me. Songs from the Big Chair. Wow. So as I said, they did a concert in Toronto. I didn't know about it, but if they're on tour, they're so good. I might actually fly to a place that they are and and watch them there. Wow. Everybody wants to rule the world. That great line. That's what we're doing here. Don't you think? Holding hands while the walls come tumbling down? Because they are. And I think nowhere is that more obvious right now than in a couple of things that have happened just in the last few days. Nigel Farage, who was one of the leaders of the Brexit, probably the face of the Brexit movement in the UK, announced via Twitter that his bank was closing his bank accounts. They were closed, right? So, of course, he calls and he says, what's the reason for this? And they said, we're going to tell you the reason in a letter. So he gets a letter, and the letter says nothing, just that they were closed, and alludes to something called, I think, commercial reasons or something, just a completely non-answer. So then he tries to open bank accounts in a number of other banks and is refused. So he has an explanation about something that the EU has designated a politically exposed person, which is supposed to stop corrupt politicians from receiving bad money. Something he's never been, I think, even accused or convicted, certainly not. I mean, what? This feels like another one of these moments where the banking conglomerate, which is deeply, deeply allied with what our guest today, CJ Hopkins, calls Globocap, is punishing him for his political beliefs, which are populist and right of center, which that's a no-no today. You can't be those things. We're going to shut you down. We're going to grab your bank accounts. We're going to bring in the police if you're a trucker. We're going to put you in jail if you're Julian Assange. No, no, no. You cannot criticize the narrative. So I'm kind of neutral about Nigel Farage. I think he's quite smart and sometimes witty. I'm not sure I'm completely on board with his politics, but who cares about that? I shouldn't even have to say that caveat. You don't go around closing people's bank accounts because you disagree with their politics, which seems to be what's happening. Don't forget Toby Young at the Free Speech Union. And also in the UK, his payment platform, which may have been PayPal, kicked them off, but then they got put back on again after a huge outcry. But this cannot be happening. This cannot be happening. They don't need to arrest you for being a dissident when they've got the banks and the financial industry doing the bidding of the official narrative. Very, very bad. That really, I gasped when I saw that recording that Nigel Farage did about this issue. And here's how it's being played in the British press, of course. It turns out he did not name the bank, but it turns out it is the Coutts Bank, Coutts. And for those lovies in the know in the UK, the Notting Hill crowd, they know that that bank is the bank of millionaires and royals. So they're going, oh, look, a man of the people was dealing with the Coutts Bank. Why shouldn't Nigel Farage be rich and dealing with a bank that deals with rich people? I don't think he ever said he wasn't making money, but that's what they do. So they don't, you see what I'm saying? This is about the informational corruption we're going to talk about today with CJ Hopkins. They can't really argue that closing bank accounts for a political reason is a good thing. They can't do that. But what they do is they start joking about how he's a big faker because he's dealing with a bank for rich people. Like, that's the issue. It's ridiculous. So that is very, very upsetting. The other thing that's happened, and you'll hear CJ and I talking about this today, are the continuing attacks on Bobby Kennedy Jr., who I am, how can I put it? I guess I'm agnostic about him. I love some of the stuff he's doing. He is, as they say in McKinsey speak, a disruptor. So that's good. And obviously, I said I was a one-note voter after COVID, and he's correct on COVID policy. So that's great. But there are other things I'd like him to clarify, and I wish people would do tough interviews with Bobby about things other than his vaccine stance. We know all about that. You're not going to lay a glove on him, folks, these reporters who think they're such hot shots. They're not. He knows it inside and out, and he might even be right. I don't know that he's not. And I'm now going back and looking at everything I know about vaccines and autism. And I'll tell you why, because just to do a little sidebar here, when I spent a couple of years working in Washington, D.C. for a Nobel Peace Prize winning NGO called Vietnam Veterans of America Foundation, right? They won the Nobel Prize for their landmines campaign. And I worked directly for the head of the org, a paralyzed Vietnam veteran named Bobby Mueller, who's a huge character in the world, really interesting guy. And I was working with media. I was trying to help the media focus their stories on veterans coming out of the Iraq War in a more fact-based way, because they were all gone, on the WMDs and this is a noble war, we got to get Saddam. They were just completely out to lunch. So in the process of doing that, I met these two reporters in DC. One of them worked for Salon.com. He was a very good investigative journo named Mark Benjamin. And the other one worked for UPI. He was the bureau chief for UPI in DC, United Press International. His name is Dan Olmsted. And so I work with them a lot on a bunch of stories, including one about how a pharmaceutical named Lariam, which was being given to troops in Iraq, and I think Afghanistan too, might be causing clusters of suicides that were happening. It was quite an interesting story that there were lots and lots and lots of suicides. And this was some of them before they even had a chance to get PTSD from the actual war, right? Were killing themselves. And it looked like it could line up with the prescribing of Lariam, which is an anti-malarial they were giving the troops so they didn't get sick from malaria in Iraq, right? So there was some pretty good science on that. Lots of smart people were saying, yeah, this could be a contributing or the factor, causes some psychosis. And even, get this, Law and Order SVU did a show about Lariam and suicide in vets. And the character who was the crusader against Lariam was a composite of these two guys I was working with, Dan Olmsted and Mark Benjamin. So I was in the thick of it with these guys, long story short. And Dan Olmsted was also writing about vaccines and autism. And he, and many people were in those days. I'm telling you, it was a mainstream idea. The thought now that it's only crazies and conspiracy theorists is absolute nonsense. It was a thing. Credible people were writing about it. And then an event happened, and I don't know the event. I'm going to go back. I'm going to research all of this, and I'm going to bring it to you in a show. Because I question everything now. I thought that it had been settled, that vaccines didn't cause autism, and that's why we stopped talking about it. So I'm just going to go back and have a little look now, because I don't believe anything they say. And I know that there were many, many, many credible journalists and others who believed very strongly that it did. So I'm going to try and get to the bottom of it, because the attacks on Bobby Kennedy about his stance are overshadowing all of the other stuff he's saying that's really, really important. So in a way, because I'm ornery, now they've made me more interested in it. It's kind of backfiring on them. So I'm going to do that. But the other thing I was saying about what's happened in the last week that I've really noticed are the attacks on him are getting more and more bizarre. For instance, the New Yorker magazine has done this kind of quasi profile that it's a hit job. I mean, it's almost part of a playbook that every time somebody writes about Bobby Kennedy now, they have to put the word conspiracy theorist and debunked and all this stuff in the cut line so that the reporters are virtue signaling that, oh, they don't take this guy seriously. They don't do that with Hunter Biden, do they? They don't say, pornographer, drug addict, hustler, guy who was facilitating his father's grift, which is, I'm only being partly sarcastic there. They don't do that. He gets all of these kind of, oh, it's a rebirth, So Bobby's over the target in many, many ways. Now, the reason I'm agnostic about Bobby is because I've not heard a proper interview with him where he's being called to account for some of the other stuff I have questions about. And they're just questions, but I do want to know if he still believes in the Russia hoax, which he did. I still want to know if he believes that people who dispute climate change should go to jail. He did think that. So he has these kind of extreme positions, and he's vocal about them. So have those just been stowed, or has he kind of revised his opinion, as I do on many things? That's a sign of an agile mind. You can have extreme positions and then change them when you get new information. These are the people I like. So I would like to hear him talk about those things. I think it's important, and we need to move beyond his vaccine stance. That's just becoming silly. And you'll hear CJ knows him pretty well, and you'll hear CJ say in the interview that Bobby's not saying, I believe this about vaccines and therefore I'm going to change vaccine policy on the basis of it. I don't think he would do that. And he couldn't anyway. I don't think he has the power to do that, even if he became president. So I'm going to do a show on some of these things and about vaccines and autism. I went back and looked at some of the research they had been producing back in the day. And I did find a very sad piece of news in that story. And that's that Dan Olmsted, who was doing some of the original reporting on this, apparently committed suicide about a year and a half ago. And there was an allegation that part of it was his frustration with not being able to pursue this in the climate in which we live now. You can't ask questions about certain things, and this is one of them, right? So I know that he did die, and apparently it was a suicide. That's what the motivation is being alleged to be, and I'm going to find out about that and phone people who knew him and pick it up, because that's what we do here, don't we? We follow the breadcrumbs wherever they lead. And then on my Substack, I am going to tell a story about something I do know about Bobby. That's a good thing, and it's a thing many people don't know. I had a very close encounter with somebody who's really close to Bobby, a family member, and there's a story attached to it that says lots of nice things about Bobby's character. So I'm going to tell that story. But in my Substack, for a premium membership, and then I'll release it in a week or so to more general audience. But I want to think about how I'm going to tell it, because it's pretty personal, and it's a good story, and it says nice things about him. So having said that, but I'm not all in. I don't go all in on anybody. I always have doubts. I don't think we should canonize Bobby Kennedy Jr., although I think what he's going through now is pretty brave and heroic, isn't it? I mean, my goodness, they act like they want to kill him. I mean, they do. And given his family history, it's just the hatred for him by the media. And I raised this with CJ in the interview. I mean, even if he won, would he be able to govern? I don't know. The deep state might try to do to him what they did to Trump. But symbolically, it's probably important to try to get him into that office, even though there are some edges that need to be squared for me. But I'm skeptical. You know that, of everybody. So let me do my pitch. The show is funded by listeners like you, and we're so grateful for your support. We do it through Substack because it's a free speech platform. They don't censor people. Some of the other platforms do, and you have to watch what you say. And I don't want to have to do that, especially in this day and age, since I believe that we are campaigning for free speech here. So go to trishwoodsubstack.com. One of you emailed me and said, why don't you post the podcast on Substack so we can have a comment section where we debate what you did? What a brilliant idea. So we're going to do that. And I will do it with this show this week. So if you want to go and comment on something I've done or said that made you mad or happy, or something CJ said that made you mad or happy, or something you can elaborate on for us, that's great. It worked out well. My Substack piece on the little Titan submersible generated a lot of interesting comments, including one from a chap who is a former coxswain in the Canadian Coast Guard, who had some really, really interesting things to say about the scandal of the reportage and the fact that the Navy did not report, as it should have, the fact that they'd heard the little Titan implode on some kind of underwater listening device. They knew it on Sunday it happened and said nothing until it was just insane. So that worked out as a conversation really well on Substack. So I'm going to be posting. You can comment on the show, say whatever you like. I don't mind. I can take it. I'm a big girl. And I do have a Twitter, which is my favorite one. I get up in the morning and go on Twitter and make a comment here and there. And we also have an Instagram page, and you can email me at info@trishwoodpodcast.com. Our guest today, as I have alluded to a couple of times already, is CJ Hopkins from the Consent Factory. He just attended a magnificent meeting in London with Michael Shellenberger and Matt Taibbi and Russell Brand. And the focus of it was, how do we take on the information or the censorship industrial complex, right? It's a big, big problem. We all know it, people, don't we? It's probably the biggest issue of our lives right now, especially in Canada, where our ability to access information, my ability to keep podcasting is under attack. And the reason they're winning is because they, like all censorious governments do, and all tyrannical governments do, is they couch it as a virtue. We're doing this to save Canadian content, or we're doing it to stop hate speech, or, they always have some phony reason for shutting people up who are criticizing them and criticizing this terrible ideology. So the fact that these big guys like Shellenberger, Taibbi, CJ, and Russell Brand are on it is good. And so CJ went and he heard the speeches, and then they broke off into these groups to talk about what's happening and what to do about it. And that gives me hope that we may get some tools soon. And I'll be reporting more on that. We talk about COVID a lot. That's why I started the podcast. COVID would not have been so COVIDian, as I say, if the media had been doing their job. The biggest failure around COVID-19 policy wasn't the policy itself. It was the media pushing it out and never asking a single hard question. They do this on every subject now. Are they questioning Zelensky? Are they questioning the war in Ukraine? No, they're not. Are they questioning climate change agenda? This is a complicated subject. We need to have nuanced discussions about it. We can't just say, oh, climate deniers bad, climate change tyranny good. And we can't do that. We won't survive doing that. This issue is, in my view, probably the main issue of our time. It's bad. And I am speaking to you as someone who spent my formative professional years as a very senior, high-level, and well-paid journalist at the CBC, back when that meant something. I always add that, back when that meant something. It doesn't now. Now I'd be embarrassed to be working there. And that's absolutely true. I would be embarrassed to be working there. So this is where we're going with the show too. We're going to be spending a lot of time talking about those things, but other things too, human things. And I will never, ever drop COVID because they're trying to rewrite history right now too. So we have to keep reminding everybody about what an absolute fiasco this is. So here is my interview with the one and only CJ Hopkins, who's in Berlin. And let me just say to you, he's not feeling very well today. He showed up and he did this 2 hours with me with a really, really, really bad cold. So props to him, but you will hear a sniffle or two. And then we really get going. And it's a really interesting discussion. So here is my interview with CJ Hopkins. Hi, CJ. How are you?
I'm okay, all things considered. Down with a little bit of a cold, but generally well.
You have had an ongoing sinus infection, haven't you?
No, I kind of lied. Yeah. In my latest piece. I've developed some allergies in my older age, and I do have sinus trouble from time to time, but that was a bit of poetic license there.
Okay. Well, it's interesting because the reason I ask is because I have one too that I can't seem to get rid of. It kind of comes and goes, and I have bad headaches and stuff. It's really an awful thing because sinus stuff always kind of feels like a really, really bad headache and like you're going to die, So I was going to commiserate with you, but since you lied about it, I won't.
I can express my sympathies. Yeah, the last piece was a little gonzo.
Very gonzo in the best way.
So there was a bit of fiction involved there. Yeah. Yeah.
No. What a piece and what an event that was. So where do we begin here? I'll broaden out into some other stuff, but I want to talk to you about what happened in London. So explain for people who don't know how you ended up going there and what was the point of this event?
The point of the event was really to kind of launch this anti-censorship alliance or campaign. It's really Michael Shellenberger's baby. Michael and his organization, Public, kind of launched the thing. And what they did is they had this public event on Thursday where Michael and Matt Taibbi and Russell Brand got up on stage at the Westminster Central Hall, and basically, gave a short version breakdown of what they've been calling the censorship industrial complex. And I took questions from the audience and had sort of I don't want to call it a pep rally, but it's sort of a launch event. And that was the public event on Thursday. At the same time, a bunch of us, relatively small group, but international group of writers and journalists and authors and some academics and some organizers were invited to get together the next day on Friday. And so we all got together and shared a lot of information, reports about what's going on in our different countries, the censorship that's going on there, and visibility filtering and basic repression of dissent, and strategized a little bit about what can we do, how can we come together, what can we do to, I don't want to sound grandiose, but launch a movement or a campaign to counter this trend, I don't know what to call it beyond a trend. It really is a concerted campaign. It's happening all the way. It's happening all around the world. So we got together and shared a lot of information and strategized about how to try to build awareness and opposition to that.
Yeah. It's interesting because I loved the piece that you wrote. Obviously, it was hilarious too. And thank you for that, because we all need a good laugh these days. But part of me was saying, I love Matt, and Michael is heroic, and Russell is great. But I just thought, really? Like, is something, can we really get together in London with like smart, like-minded people and change this? I don't know. I mean, I don't think it was wrong to have it, but I kind of feel like the train has left the station here. What kind of things were they, whatever I don't know if it was secret, but are you allowed to talk about the kind of things that they were talking about implementing as a sort of pushback against the kind of clamp down?
Yeah, sure. I can talk about some of it. There was kind of an atmosphere of extreme OPSEC, which, just personally, I found kind of funny. But
what's OPSEC? Tell me what's OPSEC?
Yeah, operational security. Military intelligence term. Anarchists are also very fond of it when they're having their anarchist meetings, and everyone gets very paranoid about infiltrators and people who are. Yeah, I gave up on all of that a long, long time ago, and just figured that everything that I say and write is accessible to the powers that be, and I'm not doing anything illegal, so I don't care. I can talk about some of it. The thing that's happening right now is those of us who are in London, we're working on trying to put a declaration together, and that's like a first step. And like any declaration, I think the intention there is to use it as a means of rallying people and gathering support, and just that first step of getting people to stand up and say, enough of this, and we need to counter it somehow. It really hasn't gone beyond that. It's really just baby steps, and this is just the first step. The people that got together on Friday were just an incredibly diverse group of people. Trish, from all across the political spectrum, and the middle, people who passionately disagree with each other on a whole host of political issues and points, and we're trying to unite under a broad umbrella to oppose this censorship and beyond that, the cultural thing, just this whole cancel culture that has developed. So it's challenging, and we're just going to have to take it step by step.
And so it sounds to me like there were people there who were from various areas on the political spectrum. That makes me happy, actually. I like that.
Yes, I think it's necessary. Yeah, there were, people where if we hadn't been in that setting and had just been in a bar, we would have been shouting in each other's faces. But all of us really working really hard to set those political differences aside and focus on this monster, because it really is, Michael's fond of saying it, and it's absolutely true, is without freedom of speech, without freedom of expression, all of our other democratic rights go out the window. It really is the foundation of everything that we understand as democracy, and it is, I don't even like to say that it's under threat, because it's under attack is the word. And I was impressed. We were all obviously really focused on the goal here, and really did our best to set all of our other political differences aside.
Well, that's good. I mean, I think Shellenberger's right. I've been saying on the podcast for 3 years that everything wrong in the world right now is because the media is compromised. I mean, I completely agree with that, especially as somebody coming from an investigative background in legacy media. Once the politicians realize, as they have, and the bureaucrats, as they have, that they can do whatever they want because they have a captured media reporting in a beneficial way for them, we're screwed. And the war in Ukraine is a perfect example of that. I mean, they can send money, the money can disappear. Zelensky can buy 1 million, villas around the world. Everybody's like, whatever. I mean, it's completely nuts that that's happening. So, I'm glad that Michael is speaking that way, and I'm glad it's somebody with his journalistic credentials who's doing it, because I think he's kind of bulletproof. He and Taibbi are reputationally really solid. And, I admire them for sticking their necks out in this way, especially after that terrible congressional hearing that they were at in D.C. I mean, that was just insane, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was a travesty. I feel the same way. I'm not a mainstream figure in any sense of the word. I was really glad to be invited to take part in this and help try to build it. And part of the reason that I wanted to do it is because of the platform and the megaphone and the reach that people like Matt and Michael have.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah.
Semi-radicals like myself, I'm never going to be able to reach the audience that these guys can reach. And, Matt and Michael, these are basically, despite what everybody calls them these days, they're mainstream liberals is what they are.
Yeah.
And if any real impact is going to be made here, it's going to be made by mainstream people with huge platforms like this, and so it's why I wanted to take part in it, and it's why I'm dedicating energy to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It would have been great if they had. Well, I'm glad they had Russell Brand. Like, he's not mainstream. He's more, kind of out there, but huge audience like Joe Rogan has. So he's powerful. But I mean, was Joe Rogan or anybody like that invited?
I don't think Rogan was there. Tim Robbins showed up.
Tim Robbins showed up?
Oh yeah. Tim. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, Tim's on board. You remember when Matt interviewed Tim, and Tim basically came out and did a mea culpa and said, "Hey, I was totally on board with this official narrative in the beginning, and following all the rules and calling people names, and I was wrong, and I regret." He came out. I thought it was really important.
Really important. And I think he's a decent bloke too, right? Like, I remember, because Susan Sarandon, as I recall, and Tim were both, as was I, and actually working for an anti-war NGO in DC, very, very vocal about the Iraq War. And of course we all were. Only a fool wouldn't have been. But then she was quite interesting, because there was a point in like around 2015 or something that Susan said, I kind of like the fact that Trump is speaking for working people. Like, she said, it was some kind of anomalous comment, and the fourth ring of hell was unleashed on her by Sure. It was like over, right? And what's interesting about that response in the context of what we're talking about is that her bona fides, remember they did the film about the Sister Prejean, it was an anti-death, like, you don't get more lefty than Susan Sarandon and Tim, right? And so even she, with the perfectly burnished bona fides as a progressive lefty, can't even entertain for a millisecond that Donald Trump might be right on a couple of issues, which he was. He was pretty anti-war. Whether he could execute is not what I'm talking about. And the tragedy of American working class people being crushed by, McKinsey moving all the factories overseas. Those are like normal human responses to say, yeah, those are good things, and I'm glad. And the fact that one minor shift in philosophy from what's proscribed means you're toast is super scary, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, Trish, you and I have talked about this a few times. This I've been calling this nascent totalitarianism, and what you're talking about is the atmosphere that many of us are living in, and it's an atmosphere that is just growing, and it really is. And I'll try to be less extreme, and I'll call it nascent totalitarianism. But it is. It's society is being divided into two groups is basically, you're one of the normals who conforms to whatever, whatever the narrative of the day is.
Yeah.
You conform to it, and you go along and you wave the flags and you wear the masks and you do whatever you're told, or you're, just an apostate. If you deviate from the official narrative at all, you are one or another type of apostate. You're a Putin lover, you're a Putin sympathizer, you're a COVID denier, a science denier, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're some form of extremist. And this is a hallmark of totalitarianism. Just this hyper conformity, hyper ideological conformity, and just demonization of anyone who's not conforming to the official ideology. That's really what you're talking about when you brought up the example of Susan Sarandon, and same thing happened to Tim. I mean, I laugh all the time. I follow Matt, and Matt, just every time Matt tweets anything, puts anything on Twitter at all, just scores or hundreds of people who chime in and call him Putin's cock holster, and how are you doing with all just this completely insane stuff. And again, if you know Matt Taibbi's work, this guy's a mainstream liberal, basically.
Yeah.
And has been for his entire life consistently.
He only recently said he wasn't going to vote Democrat, and I thought, wow, like a year ago or something. I thought, what? After everything you've been writing, holy smokes!
Sure. Well, he's not an idiot. How can you possibly whatever? The epithets that are hurled at us and that people use to smear us, and when I say us, I mean anyone who's expressing dissent these days. Yeah. They're really meaningless. They're just strategic terms. I don't know if people even understand them when they use them. The point is just to smear us or paint us with some sort of epithet marking us as deviants, basically.
Yeah. And just speaking of Matt for a minute, I have to tell you this, that when I was watching those hearings, because I'm doing a film on COVID right now, and we were doing some of the stuff on Twitter Files with Jay and various people who'd been silenced. And I am old enough to look at video of two respected journalists being attacked by government representatives and say, wow, this is really fucked. Pardon my language. But I mean, I had a visceral response to it. And I felt afterwards it was a bit of a Rorschach test, because lots of people saw that and thought, yeah, they're terrible people and go get them. And other people saw it and went, oh man, like the government is now trying to depose journalists in a public, right? And I think that dividing line about how one responded to that event is a pretty accurate barometer of who's on which side of this issue, isn't it?
I really think it is. Those hearings were incredibly ugly. We're talking, McCarthyite level stuff.
Yeah.
I wrote about it, and I think we talked about it before. It was very, very clear that the Democrats on the committee were not interested in learning or hearing anything at all. No. Their entire goal was to demonize and smear Matt and Michael and to stigmatize them in the public eye. And it was naked. There was nothing subtle about it.
I want to go into, you wrote this list in the piece that you wrote about that trip, and I want to go through the list of ways that we are being censored. But how are Matt and Michael doing? Because it feels to me like they're almost historical figures now, in a sense, and they're in kind of in a wind tunnel. I'm sure their lives have been made quite difficult. I remember when I had Matt he was one of my first guests, and I had him on. He was just really, really coming to the fore and being super, super outspoken. And I said, what does your wife think about this? Only because I figured that his income stream would have been affected. And I think it was. He's probably doing quite well now because of all this too. There's always a bit of a payback if you stick to your guns and you're lucky. But how are they doing? How do you feel they're coping with this stuff?
I think they're doing pretty well. We're not so close. We don't hang out and have barbecues together and what have you. But my take is they're doing pretty well. Michael is I really like Michael. I got to know him really in London, and he's a scrappy guy, and I like that and I admire that. I think Michael's a fighter, and he's also got a big heart. And I think he's going to be tough to knock down. I think Matt's, maybe a little bit more sensitive and takes things maybe a bit harder. But I think he's dealing well with everything, handling everything really well, considering what has happened with the IRS showing up at his house. And
I know,
and just
right.
And just the level of abuse that he's been subjected to. I think both of them are doing really well and standing up to it well.
Yeah. Let me ask you about, because I know you've got Matt's obviously being harassed by the IRS. What about you? You've got a criminal thing hanging over your head, don't you?
Yeah, I'm being investigated. I'm being criminally. The Berlin state prosecutor has opened a criminal investigation of me for 2 tweets.
What are the tweets?
It's funny. I'll back up. My lawyer just sent the tweets. Originally, I'll tell you the whole story. My book about what happened in 2020 and 2021, which is a collection of my consent factory essays from those years. It's called The Rise of the New Normal Reich. And the cover of the book, obviously the title and the cover of the book is playing off of William Shirer's, internationally world famous book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. Right. And you might, and listeners might remember the cover of William Shirer's book. When I was growing up, there was a copy of it on everybody's bookshelf, that black cover with the big red lettering. And then down below it, there was the little white circle with the swastika in it. All right.
Yeah. Everybody had that book, right? Everybody's parents had that book, didn't they?
Yeah. That's when I was growing up. It was obligatory. It was on everybody's bookshelf somewhere.
Well, I think they were trying to figure out what the hell happened. Actually, if we put our minds back to that, my father served in the Navy, the Canadian Navy in the North Atlantic. And there wasn't really anything like that before that. So I think that generation was really desperate for information, weren't they? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, my uncles were in the war as well. Anyway, my brilliant book cover artist, Anthony Freda, and we came up with this book cover playing off the Shirer book. And so same thing, cover my book, all black, red letters. Except down at the bottom, there is one of the medical-looking COVID masks, and then very faintly behind the mask, so the mask is covering it, is that swastika from the Shirer book, right? So you kind of half see it. Matt described it. You have to squint at it to see it. So mask covering the swastika. So that is my alleged crime, tweeting the cover art of my book.
And so it's a crime that in Germany you cannot utilize a swastika in any way, shape, or form? Yeah. Well, what's the law?
Let me get to that in a minute, because I'll give you a scoop, actually, because I just got this news in. Originally, when I was notified of the investigation, they said, we're investigating you for these 2 tweets that you tweeted in August of 2022, but they didn't show us the tweets, and the tweets had been censored, so I had no idea what they were. They described them. And it was obviously the cover art of my book. My lawyer just received the two tweets. He asked the prosecutor to produce them, and what they are. The one tweet, it's the cover art from the book. The mask with the swastika, and I wrote it in German. And the tweet in German basically says that the masks are ideological conformity symbols. That's all they are. That's all they've ever been. Stop acting as if they're anything else, or get used to wearing them. All right. Right. So obviously likening obviously using the imagery as a warning of coming totalitarianism. And the other tweet is also the cover art from the book. And it's a quote by Karl Lauterbach, the German Minister of Health. He had put a tweet up saying, "The masks send out a signal." Right. And so I posted the cover art again, and I quoted him. "The masks send out a signal." Yes, they do send out a signal. And I made this point, Trish, just constantly during 2020 and 2021, constantly just saying that, masks don't work. We know they don't work. We knew they didn't work before this pandemic. Everybody at the beginning of the pandemic said they don't work. And then everybody turned around, all the experts turned around. So, oh, yes, masks, suddenly they all work. From the beginning and all through it, the masks were conformity symbols. That's all. That's what they were. And they were theater. It's a point that I made throughout the whole thing. So the law, the German law, and a lot of people don't understand this, so let me explain it. Of course, in Germany, displaying swastikas is illegal if you're a Nazi or if you're supporting Nazis. But there are exceptions in the law for art and historical purposes and education, and displaying swastikas in a way that when you're countering anti-constitutional activity, of course, exactly what I was doing. If there weren't these exceptions, you couldn't, show historical films or teach anything or what have you. So there isn't this blanket ban on displaying swastikas. It's the absurdity of what I'm charged with, and I think I've got it memorized now. The part of the law that is the basis of this investigation, I am accused of disseminating, this is the quote, disseminating propaganda, the content of which is intended to further the aims of a former National Socialist organization.
Wow.
End quote. The prosecutors looked at my tweets, cover of my book, whatever, and they decided to accuse me of this, although it is blatantly obvious that my intent is exactly the opposite. I'm opposing totalitarianism. I'm not supporting it. Wow.
And so where does the case stand then?
We're waiting. Basically, I found a German lawyer, and the lawyer has submitted a response, 2 responses now, actually. We're waiting to see whether they want to go ahead and prosecute me or not.
And so, do you know where this was generated? In other words, was a German prosecutor sitting around reading CJ Hopkins' tweets or something? Or how was it brought to the attention of the authorities? How did that happen?
That I don't know.
You don't? Are you entitled to know? Is that part of the process that your lawyer can demand some kind of discovery about how the complaint was laid? It would seem to me that's evidentiary, and they would have to tell you about it, right?
I think probably if it goes forward, I mean, that makes sense, but I don't know. Yeah, it's not, it hasn't come into play at this point.
Why do you think it's happened then? I know you're blue skying, but what is the point of it? It seems so stupid.
It seems stupid, but the only way that I can interpret it, Trish, the charges are so blatantly absurd. I mean, my intent and my behavior all through the pandemic and everything that I've written and published it's so obviously not in support of fascism or Nazism or neo-Nazism or anything like that. It's my opposition to totalitarianism in all of its forms is so abundantly clear that the only way that I can interpret this is as retribution and intimidation, and just another example of the authorities trying to scare people, threaten people, make an example of anyone expressing dissent. I think I'm relatively small potatoes, but it's the same thing that's happening to Roger Waters. He's also under criminal investigation. And of course, the most glaring case right now is Julian Assange. Thursday night at Central Hall, Stella Assange got up on stage for a little while and just briefed everybody on where things are, kind of in the end stages of his case, and it's heartbreaking, and basically they're just destroying this guy. As an example, it's like in the old days when they used to put your head on a pike, on a spike outside the castle wall. And this is happening all over, to very prominent people and to less prominent people.
Well, so there's just so much to unpack there. But just speaking about Stella and what she said, I'm curious to know who the they is in the Assange case. Is it the DOJ under Biden? Is it the State Department? Like, who is compelling the Brits to keep him in Belmarsh prison? Where is that energy coming from? Do you know?
Well, I think it's, technically it's coming from the U.S. Yes, I think it's coming from the DOJ and basically the powers that be in the U.S. But if you ask me, it's coming from the empire. I don't want to get into a long philosophical thing unless you want me to. Well,
sure. Like sure. Go ahead. I mean, can I throw into the mix also then, since you're going to maybe go on a roll, but the other thing that is sort of the opposite side of that is that yesterday Nigel Farage announced that his bank is deplatforming him. His bank said, we're closing your accounts. He went to 16 other UK banks. Nobody will give him an account. And Toby Young obviously had a problem at the Free Speech Union with I think it was PayPal or somebody. It's just sort of coming at everybody in a million different ways. And I think it's all coming from the same place you're about to talk about, which is this kind of global bunch of, psychopaths who are running the show and punishing people who don't go along with their agenda.
Yeah, Trish, my shtick. I've been and my readers know it, and I've been repeating it and writing about it for years. I feel basically the short version of it is Globocap, whatever you want to call it. Mr. Global, Globocap, however people want to describe the supranational network of power that is really running our world these days. Globocap is going totalitarian on us. And it's not 20th century totalitarianism. It's a new form of totalitarianism. But it has so many of the same hallmarks. And this is one of them. There are numerous other cases like mine in Germany. You just mentioned a bunch of cases in the UK. Look what they did to the people who supported the Canadian truckers. Yeah. The message here is absolutely clear. The message is, we're not playing grab ass. You want to stand up to us. You want to, express dissent. You want to try to rebel against what we're doing. We're going to crush you. We're going to crush you. We're going to, put you in jail. We're going to shut off your money. We're going to hurt your family. That's the message that is being sent to us.
Yeah, that is the message that's being sent to us. And let's I have to tell you, I gasped when I saw the Nigel Farage thing. I mean, I was an intake of breath. I thought, wow, this guy. I mean, I know they don't like him, Brexit. Everybody hated Brexit, right? But this is just so shockingly direct. Let's get back to Stella, because I want to know what she, you suggest in your piece, which everybody must read, that we're in a kind of an end phase. Is that because she is suggesting that Julian may be dying, that he cannot continue in this way? What was the undercurrent of that talk she gave?
No, not at all. I mean, I think he is in pretty bad shape. Anybody would be in pretty bad shape. But the point that Stella was trying to get across is they're running out of moves. They're down to their last moves, and it's the end game. He could be extradited in a matter of weeks.
Wow.
And there are. Yeah, the legal moves are just about done, and this is it. It's crunch time.
And so is anybody talking about what people should do if that happens? I mean, are there plans being made for everybody to descend? I'm assuming he'd be flown to D.C. to some Democrat-controlled federal court there. And we know how completely corrupt the court system is in America right now. I mean, are people to go to, like, what happens then? Do we know what's happening then if he is extradited? What happens?
I don't know. Stella didn't get into that. She is, understandably, she is absolutely committed to trying to stop it. And she's calling just for anyone who hasn't spoken out, anyone who hasn't stood up to make as much noise as humanly possible and raise their voices against this. She's still very much trying to stop the extradition from going forward. And understandably so. I don't know what happens if it goes ahead. Of course, I've thought about it, and it would be wonderful if hundreds of thousands of people just park themselves in front of Belmarsh, and just refuse to let the extraditors in, and but that's kind of my fantasies.
Well, I might go there. I mean, that's how strongly I feel. I might have to go there and do that. I still can't even, we forget about Julian, right? I go on about my business, and I'm all in on the, supporting people like Taibbi and Russell and Shellenberger and you and all the wonderful people who are thinking it through and speaking out. But it's almost like, if we can't save Julian, what the hell are we even doing? Really, right? Because I was legacy media when he was breaking those stories, and everybody was like in love with Julian, right? Everybody wanted to have Julian's number and Julian's leaks and this and that, and Glenn Greenwald was. He was very much involved in that, and I think he still supports Julian in a big way. But so was the New York Times and everybody else. And this is what I think. And I am a Hillary hater. I'm irrational about her. But I just hate her. And it wasn't really until the Hillary emails and the DNC emails that showed that they were rigging the election on her behalf, that whole deal, the big lie that it was a Russian hack, which it was not, and Julian said it was not, that they turned on him, right? I mean, it's that whole kind of cabal of Clintonites and the corrupt DC Democrat justice or judicial machine, I think that's cranking this up. And I will, as long as I live, I will never forgive Donald Trump for not pardoning him. He should have. If he was going to do one thing, he should have done that. So I just can't believe that that is still going on, and we're still talking about it. And, it's just really, really overwhelming sometimes, isn't it?
It is. It is, and I feel bad sometimes myself, because I can't help but be pessimistic about it. It's just very clear to me that they are determined to make an example of Assange. They're determined to very, very publicly destroy this guy as a lesson. and a warning to anyone else who would defy them. And when I say them, it's all the people you described, but it's much broader than that. Trish, the British authorities could have stopped this anytime. They could still stop it. This is, once again, it's whatever you want to call it. I get tired of arguing about the names. The Empire, Globocap, Mr. Global. I know. It's this. It's in case people are confused, what we're talking about is a supranational, decentralized network of governments and corporations and NGOs and banks and financial institutions and so on. It's the power system that governs our entire planet. And it doesn't come down to 10 guys in a room that you can point at and get rid of. It's a big, complex power system, but it is the one that's running things.
Well, I'll point at Larry Fink at BlackRock, who's my new nemesis over the ESG stuff. He's just, there's a clip of him, which I'm going to find and put on the show one day, where he says he uses his power as this ginormous investment dude to make CEOs obedient to what he wants. And I thought, I thought that the Wall Street guys were the big macho guys who were supposed to save us, but they're just a bunch of little bitches, right? Who are, right? Yes. Who are just whatever Larry wants, we'll put Dylan Mulvaney. Like, it's just insanity. It's insanity.
Well, you can point at him. You can point at all these guys. There's a lot of people to point at, and it's correct because it's them. But it's just more complex than that. What I'm trying to say is it doesn't come down to any 10 or 20 or 50 individuals. It's a systemic thing that we're dealing with. I don't want to go through it all again today. I've written about it. It's in my books and in my essays, which people can read.
You okay?
Yep. Yeah, I'm fine. I'm just terribly congested, but I'm okay.
Do you need to take a drink of water or something like that? We can break for
I've got one.
Okay.
I'm strategically muting myself and taking sips of water and tending to myself. Sorry, it's not working perfectly, but hopefully it's okay.
No, it is working perfectly. And you warned me about this, but I was so keen to have you on today because of this experience in London. So we all feel for you, CJ. We've all been sick like that, and it's not good.
But I'm a man. I'm a man, Trish, and you know how it is. You know how it is when men have colds.
What, that you completely wimp out? Is that, or that you soldier on? Which?
Well, it's alert them. It's, alert the media and, shut down society because a man has a cold. I'm joking. And
colds can be the devil though, too. They can, when I get them, they hang on. And I can be pretty kind of flattened for a couple of days with a cold. So it's not just you, CJ. Yeah. And I do demand that people attend my illness with me. So. So I just want to get back to, I know it's not just Larry Fink, but I will tell you something. As I learned about Larry Fink and was able to research Larry Fink and put a name to Larry Fink, there was some solace in it, because when it has a name and a face and a house in the Hamptons and a jet and all that stuff, then it's almost less scary. It means, he's just like a psychopath. We can fight that, right? When it's the big kind of amorphous thing and you can't see it or name them, then it's more frightening and you feel more helpless. So that's why I talk about Larry Fink a lot on the show, because Vivek Ramaswamy has done some pretty interesting soliloquies on him. And so I feel like I'm just fighting bad people. There's no kind of omnipotent force. They're just bad people. So that was a comfort to me in a strange way.
And I think that's good. I think there are, all of those battles, and there are a lot of people who are fighting specific battles on specific points and confronting specific people. And all of that is good and necessary and wonderful. And I support it. What I've been trying to do is kind of capture where we are in a broader abstract or systemic way.
Yeah.
And it does sometimes it does depress people, and they get upset with me and say, what can we do, and why are you painting everything so dark? I think we need both, and I think I wrote it in the piece. I think that a lot of us are so focused on the trees, on the individuals, on the specific issues, and we're missing the forest, which is what I've been trying to write about, Trish. And I always I go back to the early 90s. I go back to the end of the Cold War. And this was, the left, the Marxist left, the whole idea of the left in that sense. This was really the last ideological adversary to global capitalism. And what happened is the Soviet Union dissolved, and that ideology lost its base and its validation, and we became a global capitalist world. We became a world that is dominated by a single ideology, and I'm talking about every country on earth, including China and Russia and everything. That power system. When you have a power system that occupies the entire territory and no longer has an external ideological adversary, there's nothing left for that power system to do other than go totalitarian, right? There aren't any more external enemies to fight. And if you look, what I've been trying to argue and put forward is, if you look at the history of the last 30 years, that's what I see pretty clearly. I see the first global hegemon in human history, which that's easy to say, but really, I don't think we have got our heads around what that means. The first globally hegemonic power system in human history, and it's conducting a clear and hold operation. It's basically wiping out internal dissent and establishing ideological uniformity. And of course it is, because there's really nothing else to do.
And the uniformity comes in a sense in the form that I feel like we're being conditioned to behave in a certain way. And in your piece, you mentioned something that Matt said, which is that he feels, and his observation about how the media landscape, if we even can call it that anymore, is actually conditioning people to censor themselves, right? It's all about obedience and conformity. And I will tell you that even happens to me. Sometimes it does come in my head. If I do this, like I'm moving from Patreon, for example, because Patreon is quite censorious, and I'm small enough fry that they don't probably care about me. But if somebody complained about me, they would care about me. And they were deplatforming. I think Joe Rogan used to be on Patreon like 10 years ago and fled because they were doing that. So I was trying to make the point that we do kind of censor ourselves in a way as well. And I think that's what they intended. What did Matt say about that? What was his take on that idea?
It was basically that quote that I put in my piece. I think what Matt was doing is Thursday night at the event. He made reference to the Twitter files and all the reporting that he and Michael have done on the traditional censorship, the government pressuring the corporations to censor. This is the way most of us understand censorship, right? The government decides it wants something censored, and it either censors it directly, or these days it tells a corporation, censor this tweet, deplatform this guy, right? And so it's a top-down model. And what Matt was getting into in that quote, and it's something he's been focusing on more, is more the territory that I've been working in, which is not really that traditional censorship, but it's more the manipulation
yes.
Of reality. is what it comes down to. I wrote a piece called "The War on Reality." Alex Gutentag also wrote a great piece with the same title, I think, at one point. What we're talking about is governments, corporations, NGOs, all these actors, manipulating, first of all, the information that we have access to. Google is a prime example. Wikipedia is another, prime example. It's a spook shop. First of all, manipulating the information that we have access to. And that we need in order to build our views and opinions and have the discussions that we have. And then secondly, restricting, manipulating, and delegitimizing the voices that they want to repress, which does a couple of things. First of all, it turns the volume of those voices way down. My social media is basically useless to me at this point. I am completely snuffed out on Facebook is a joke. My Facebook account is so visibility filtered. I think I reach about 3 people now, unless I tag people. And Twitter, I'm still shadow banned on Twitter. There's still restrictions. I don't know what they are. But the one thing it does, it turns the volume down on dissidents. And yes. The other thing it does is it scares the shit out of the rest of the people. It's like basically, wow, I need to watch what I say or I'm going to get visibility filtered. And especially people who are actually investing money in their communications online. Goes back and connects with the Farage thing, right? The corporations are basically demonstrating to people, hey, if you start pushing out a bunch of views that we don't like and that we can't use, we're going to basically visibility filter you into oblivion. And it's complex. It's actually genius, Trish. It's complex because it's not. What has happened with Twitter is fascinating to me. When I go and I look at Twitter, Twitter has become a little ghetto for mostly conservative voices that want to shout about a bunch of controversial issues, specific controversial issues, and a lot of these are absolutely fine. It's become a little echo chamber for this to happen. But if you step across the line and start expressing dissent in other areas, zap, you're gone. Right. Yeah. So you have this simulation of free speech. So everyone feels, I can yell at trans activists all day. Elon is, giving me free speech. I can yell at. But then if you step across a line and start expressing dissent in other areas, whoops, you're gone. Right. So, and that's I'm just barely touching on it. It's what Matt was getting at, and what I've been writing about a lot is it is an incredibly complex, systemic phenomenon. It's not just what the internet corporations are doing; it's also happening kind of organically, culturally. Just the seeds have been sown, and they are sprouting. And people are doing it. People are turning into, the Germans call them Blockwarts, little snitches and tattletales and, looking for signs of deviance that they can report. It's feeding all through our cultures and societies.
Yeah, we are living in a time that historians will look back on and say, how the hell did people let that happen? Because I really feel right now that there is an us and a them. And, I said earlier that I hate Hillary Clinton. I try not to hate anybody, and hating people isn't good for me because I get upset. It's bad for my nervous system, right? She can really get me going, but partly because as a woman, I hated the fact that she didn't have to compete on a level based on merit, right? She was just, when she was running, people said, "Oh, she's the most qualified woman ever to run for office." No, she's not. She torched everything. Libya is a disaster. She ruined everything she put her hand to. She supported her husband against all comers with allegations of rape. Though she destroyed the women. I mean, how can we as women? It's just insane, right? And that's the kind of stuff that I can really get going about. But I don't like to say that I hate people. It's not good.
It's all that stuff. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Trish.
Sure.
All that stuff is insane to you and me, But if you talk to the boys that actually run things in Washington,
yeah.
and you show them that CV, they're like, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. There has never been a conflict she didn't want to make worse, right? It's just, and not to mention what she did to Donald Trump. Love him or hate him, I always put a little caveat in there. But wow, shocking. It's just America is so over. But I'm just getting back the idea of an us and a them mentality. And that for me is a hard thing now to navigate, because honestly, in my life, there are lots of topics I just don't discuss with people unless I know what they think about it, because I don't want to get into it. I don't want to see their eyes glaze over when I say children actually don't die, healthy kids, of COVID. They really don't. And they're like, "What do you mean? There were 2,000 people in hospitals in Toronto, 2,000 kids." I mean, it's just, I feel like sometimes I can't do it anymore, and that entrenches us further into our little informational silos, doesn't it? We have to stop that. Maybe we don't, but I don't know.
Well, we do. I don't know if we can, but we have to try. I've written about this a lot. Trish, what's been happening over the past year, a little over a year, I guess, is, the narrative, the official narrative of the pandemic is being cemented. It's being enshrined in official history, and I think I'm hyper attentive to this, and I annoy some people with this. Michael, for example, Michael Shellenberger, right? They just broke this big story about the lab leak.
Yeah.
Right? And I jumped up and started sniping, at it.
What were you sniping about? What were you sniping about?
I did the same thing with the Twitter files, right?
Oh, I know that. I know. Yeah.
And I adore and respect Matt, and I really respect Michael as well. And let me make this point, because it's a good point. It's a difficult point for some people to understand, I think, but I think it's an important point. I've written a lot about limited hangouts. Yeah. Right. And for people who haven't read that, I'll just very quickly, a limited hangout, what it is, when some powerful entity, a government corporation, when they can't hide something dirty anymore because it's going to come out, the story's going to come out, and they can't hide it. Sometimes what they do is a limited hangout. So they take a little piece of the story and they put that little piece of the story out there, so that people can grab it and report on it, and it becomes the story. And they do that in order to distract us from the rest of the story. Right? That's what a limited hangout is. It's here, have this little piece of the story, get all obsessed about this, little piece of the story, and don't look over here at the rest of the story that we don't want you to see. Yeah. In my opinion, my analysis, the Twitter files and the lab leak story, these are classic limited hangouts. If you look at what happened with the Twitter files, they were given access to a certain limited amount of information. It was huge. It was monumental. And then Musk shut it down. And it was gone before it could get into any of the real nitty gritty. Lab leak is another example. So,
let's just talk about the lab leak for a minute, because I'm pretty mad about that. And go ahead.
Let me just make this one point, because people don't understand. There's so much black and white thinking these days.
Yeah,
Trish, when I say something is a limited hangout, that doesn't mean that it's fake, and that it doesn't mean that it is not, in and of itself, a huge, important story. Right? Twitter files, lab leak. These are, yes, they are huge, important stories. They are also limited hangouts. right? It's not a black or white issue. It's about understanding how perception and reality is manipulated. Sorry, go ahead.
No, look, I'm glad you said that, because it actually makes the point I was trying to make feel even stronger. And that is the idea that the lab leak thing really bugs me, because anybody with a brain who's been reading and following the story from the beginning knows it came from Wuhan. There's no question. And there's a place on the virus called the fur and cleavage site. Couldn't exist on the virus unless it was manipulated in a lab. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that, right? But what they've done, it's actually brilliant. So yeah, there's emails of Tony Fauci and Jeremy Farr from the Wellcome Trust kind of plotting about this. I think it was Nature or Lancet or something that's going to say, oh no, it's not reliable. Back and forth. And one American agency says, yes, it is. And then the other one says, no, it isn't. I mean, they're just flooding the zone with nonsense so that we don't think about the idea that not only is this a lab leak, it's a lab leak funded by the American government, maybe to make a bioweapon. Why are we doing that in China? Like those questions that follow from the premise of the truth, which is it's a lab leak or a lab, whatever it is, was man-made virus, gain of function, are not being asked because they keep clouding the issue with the reality of what it may or may not be, right? And it's so frustrating because I'm working on a film right now about COVID, and we're going to talk about some of these issues. And for people who haven't been deeply immersed in it, as you have and I have and other smart people have, they're like, well, but didn't that government agency say it probably wasn't a leak and that it did come from a bat? And I'm like, oh, and that's what they've done to us. That's what their kind of information warfare has done to us, right? It's zapped our critical thinking, created factions who can say, oh, well, that was resolved when in fact it wasn't. Like, it's so frustrating for me. It's very, very frustrating. And on that subject, especially because if it's true, which it is, what does it mean? What does it actually mean?
Yeah, and I think my perspective is just a little different. Like the whole discussion about whether it was a lab leak, not lab leak, it come from bats or pangolins or wherever it came from.
Yeah.
To me, this whole this, again, and I'm not saying it isn't important to answer these questions, but this is what we're being given to chew on.
Yes.
This is what we're being fed to chew on. What we're not being given to chew on is what happened in the spring of 2020. And it's something I've referred to this and linked to it in a number of my pieces. I actually documented it during March and April of 2020. I created a 257 tweet thread. And each of the tweets was just, a mainstream media story, a headline that came out. And what I was documenting was the simultaneous coordinated rollout of the new normal, of the new totalitarianism. And Trish, it was rolled out in the course of 6 weeks. And the whole package, everything was rolled out. It was martial law. It was lockdowns. It was mask mandates. It was, you're going to get a vaccine. There are going to be vaccine passes. Life is going to change forever. It was the most monstrous and most impressive official propaganda campaign in human history. And the message was absolutely clear. It was, democracy's over, folks. Here's a big scary virus, and we're shutting democracy down. And it happened in 6 weeks. At the time that it was happening, it was already clear, that this it was a virus with an extremely high survival rate that was affecting primarily very old and very sick people. Everything that we now know and that has been acknowledged about the virus was known then.
Yes. Yes.
The story, to me, the story that is, it's not being told and it's not going to be told in any sort of, mainstream forum is what happened. how did that happen? Where did the pictures of the dead guys lying in the streets of China?
Well, listen, we've got this in our film, right? And nobody knows where those came from. And not only the dead guys in those ridiculous videos, but the bot campaign that emerged from some account in Italy of some random person that was retweeted like 4 million times or something, saying the West must lock down. What is that? And why is anybody not curious about that? And I let me just say, we had an editorial discussion about that yesterday, me and the editor I'm working with on, who's really smart and quite a good critical thinker. And he said, well, what are we going to do about this? And I said, I think we're going to have to say that nobody knows where they came from. I don't think we can pretend to know. We can't. I think we just have to say we don't know where they came from. The origin of these videos and tweets is still to this day unknown, right?
Yeah, the picture that I was referring to, it's, maybe you could chase it down. It was an AFP photographer, but suddenly it was everywhere. Michael, I just watched a speech that Michael gave somewhere, and he made this point as well. Why in the spring of 2020, why suddenly, everything that all of the experts, all of the epidemiologists, all of the, global health experts, everything that they had prepared for years, to do in the event of a pandemic, suddenly, no, we're not going to do that anymore.
Yeah.
We're not going to do all that stuff that we spent years preparing to do. Yeah. And we're going to throw out all of the knowledge, the whole knowledge base that we were going to take into, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to do martial law. Yeah. We're going to turn the whole planet into a pathologized police state, and we're going to do it in the course of 6 weeks. I encourage people to go back and look at that 257 tweet thread, because it was compiled as it happened during those 6 weeks in March and April.
Date? What's the date? So March of 2020? It's
March and April of 2020, and okay. It's there in some of my essays. I can send you a link later. Okay. But if people go back and read some of my recent essays, I put it in 2 or 3 essays back. There's a link to it.
I'll do a Substack so people can find it again.
It's, if you go back in hindsight and you look at those 257, look at the messages that were being sent out. Headline after headline is, we're in a new normal. We're never going back to the way things were. It's the soldiers are coming. It's horrifying, and I think maybe now people can go back and recognize it with hindsight, and I encourage people to do it.
Yeah, no, I will absolutely enable that. I want to get back to this London event that you were at. And I want to go through, you made a list of things that represent how we're being manipulated. But before we do that, I want to ask you about the idea that we are being kind of turned against each other, right? I just talked a little bit about not wanting to hate people. I try not to, but it's interesting because our side, I would say that I'll just use the phrase awake for want of a better phrase, but people who see the grift, the kind of globalist grift, right? Don't seem to be on the cruelty side. Like, I don't think my neighbor's a bad person for being suckered into believing a whole bunch of dumb stuff about COVID. I don't wish harm on them. I don't hope they die. I don't, hope that they have a vaccine reaction because they took it and I didn't. I don't hope any. I actually wish them well, although I find sometimes discussions frustrating. Why do you think there is that difference between us and them, that we are, what they do is that they've made our differences of opinion a moral problem. And I think maybe that's where you said the pathologization of dissent or something, right? That we're terrible if we dissent into any of the things that they're talking about. Is that part of the success of what's happened, that they're playing dirty and they're making us look like immoral monsters for thinking the way we do about free speech and anti-censorship and that sort of thing? What do you think about that, CJ?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, Trish. It's a classic hallmark of totalitarianism. Dissidents, people expressing dissent, nonconformists. They're not under totalitarianism. We're not just weird. We are a threat. We are a threat to the social body, to the totalitarian social body. And it ties into the pathologization. We are perceived and we are treated as a disease, as something that is pathological. Yeah. If you look at the way the quote unquote unvaccinated, all of us were demonized and pathologized during the height of the mass hysteria, and it's still going on. As the COVID mass hysteria faded. Good friends of mine who I had been, fighting tooth and nail with during all of that, they switched over to the official Ukraine Russia war narrative, and then suddenly I was just as much of a dangerous threat to society because I wasn't waving a Ukrainian flag and parroting the official narrative. It's I can't stress it enough. It's a classic hallmark. It's an essential feature of totalitarianism. This internal enemy of deviants, who are feared and hated. That's it. It's we are feared and hated, and we serve as the repositories of all of that hatred and aggression.
Can I, before we do that, Liz, I just want to have a frank discussion with you about Bobby Kennedy, if we can, because I'm like a pinball bouncing around on Bobby. I met Bobby and interviewed him many, many years ago on a beach in BC. He was out there doing an environmental event with our First Nations people, admirable event. And I will say in those days, that was back in the 90s, right? He was pretty handsome. And he carried with him, I'll never forget that day on the beach, because he carried with him this whole weight of history. He was so much like his dad, and he said before his voice went, a bit wonky with this ailment he's got. He sounded like Bobby, and you can't look at Bobby Kennedy, especially in those days, and not feel that you're sitting with history. You're kind of in the back of the motorcade with JFK and Jackie or something. It's really very destabilizing, and it must have been for him too to have to walk around like this sort of image of history. And then I actually had another fairly significant encounter with a cousin of his that I'm going to talk about in a special Substack that I'm prepared now finally to talk about. I wasn't, but I will. So I'm, I didn't believe his vaccine autism stuff. I did back in the 2000s when a lot of people did, including really solid reporters I knew, including this one I told you in the pre-chat who had committed suicide recently, perhaps because he'd been hounded over his covering of this. But the reaction to Bobby now, and this just is maybe because I'm ornery, the attacks on him as a conspiracy theorist and all the crappy things that legacy media is saying, never engaging on the facts, makes me now want to look at the vaccine and autism thing again. I was on the other side, right? But now I want to investigate it. I don't believe anything these people say, but I'm also a little bit wary of Bobby because he's all over the map on a whole bunch of stuff that's important to me. And you always have smart takes on complicated things. And I wonder what your take on Bobby is.
My take on Bobby, I have to say up front that I'm pretty biased. I grew up in a house where the Kennedys were worshipped. Yeah.
Me too.
And Bobby got in touch with me when I was writing some of my COVID essays. used a quote from one of my essays in his book, and we did an interview together, and just personally pleased to have met and talked to the guy. I try to stay out of partisan politics, and part of the reason I try to stay out of cheerleading in partisan politics. I definitely use it as material for my satire.
Yeah,
but I try to stay out of the cheerleading function. So I'm biased, and I'm biased towards Bobby Kennedy Jr. and I wrote a piece basically, saying if I voted, I would vote for the guy.
Yeah. Well, I probably would too, but let me just say this to you, because you are a critical thinker. So does he not say things that make you nervous, like the fact that he thinks Joe Biden's a great guy and he supports him? Does that, in the scheme of where we are right now, not make you nervous? I mean,
it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me. He's playing a political game, Trish, and this is the way the game is played. It's the piece that I wrote is funny. And he liked it too. He wrote back and said that he did. But the piece that I wrote was basically giving Bobby advice, from way out here on the fringes. Yeah. The advice was, they're not going to let you win anyway. It's not good. It's not gonna happen. You're not going to be president. So fuck it. Yeah. So, fuck it. Go out there, tell the truth, burn it down. Don't play the game. Go out and just do it raw and tell the truth. He can't. He's trying to play the game. He's surrounded by, advisors and campaign strategists and so on. And so it's a candidacy. That's what we're watching. I always go back to that classic film from, I think it was the 70s with Bob Redford, the candidate, just showing how this machine works. I disagree with Bobby's positions on just a whole host of things, but when I watch his candidacy, I'm watching it with the awareness that I'm watching that machine operating.
Yeah, he had a pretty big misstep the other day on trans ideology, and I was sad to see it, but, it's a candidacy, right? I guess you're right about that. I mean, nobody's perfect. And he holds like 5 years ago, he wanted to jail people who didn't agree with climate change ideology, right? He was all in on the Russia hoax, right? So, I don't know. I said that were I an American, I would be a one issue voter, and it would be who got COVID right, and Bobby got COVID right. So I would vote for Bobby. But I'm with you. I think if he did just say that the world fell into a matrix of goodness and he actually got elected, which is not going to happen. The media will not let it happen. I predicted that he will be punished the way Trump was by the deep state. There'll be constant. I don't know. Can the Democrats impeach their own candidate, their own president? I don't know. Sure. I don't know. They probably would. But how do you escape the kind of crazy managerial bureaucracy class who were constantly trying to sabotage, people that they don't like, the same people who signed the document, the 50 former spooks and former spooks who said the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. They're all still there, right? They're all still there. So how would Bobby ever even manage to navigate? I mean, is he going to deal with AOC's nonsense and Nancy Pelosi's lies? How would that even work in Washington if he became president as a Democratic candidate? I mean, I don't understand it.
Yeah, well, Trish, what you're getting into, and this is where people will, call us conspiracy theorists, but but it's silly. I mean, it's a known fact. There's nothing conspiratorial about it. There's a permanent there is a permanent infrastructure, a permanent establishment in Washington that runs the place. And politicians come and go, senators and Congress people and presidents, they come and go. But there are career people who live there, and they're not going anywhere. And basically, you can turn the ship this way, turn the ship that way, do this and do that, and whatever. But there are lines you do not cross. Even if you're the president, there are lines that you don't cross. Trump. Some people think Trump was a whole big show. Trump was an accident. Nobody saw Trump coming.
Yeah.
No, Trump was not supposed to get in there, and we all saw. I covered it. During the entire period of time, we saw what happens when an unauthorized president gets elected. It was brutal and it was relentless, and it went on until they got him out of there. And then they inaugurated the next puppet, and they did it in an occupied DC with soldiers in the streets and fences up. And nobody was allowed to come to the inauguration, and there was a field of flags. I mean, the message couldn't have been clearer. Yeah. They're not going to let Bobby become president. Trump woke the monster up. Yeah, and the monster is not playing grab ass anymore.
Yeah, no, and they're not even trying to hide it. That's the thing, right? They're not.
No, they want us to know. Yeah, they want us to understand. This is what I've been writing about and trying to get across. Is that they're not hiding at all. They're making it very. Again, folks, go back and look at those 257 tweets. They're shouting it loud and clear. It's like grab ass is over, kids. Yeah. We're running this place, and you will follow orders, or we will crush you.
Well, I will say this about Bobby, and maybe I'll have a chance to interview him one day. But the story I have about Bobby that I'm going to tell at some point in the next week or so it's a positive story, actually. And, he is a recovering addict, as am I, a recovering alcoholic. And we did kind of meet on a hill around that through a relative of his who I deeply, deeply admire and care about. And it's a good story, and I'm going to tell it. But I think that one of the things his candidacy has done is it has also revealed more of the monster, because the attacks on him, and there's lots of ways to attack Bobby. I think Bobby was probably a terrible husband. He's a terrible womanizer, as the Kennedys all were and are, and so women don't like that stuff, but we live with it because sometimes the best candidate is the guy who can't keep in his pants. That's, smart women live with it, right? But I think that what he's done and what his candidacy is, has exposed further the corruption of the media, because what they're going after him about, it's not even that, right? Which is a legitimate question, I suppose. If we think, maybe it is a legitimate question. It's they're like they just say he's a conspiracy theorist. So it's like, well, in what way? Like, what is he saying that's a conspiracy? And if it is a conspiracy, please debunk it. But they don't do that, right? So they're showing it's kind of like he is catalyzing, to use a McKinsey word, the failure of the media to be even remotely objective. They're all using the same criticisms. They're not giving him a break at all. There's nothing good about Bobby, et cetera, et cetera. And I wonder if that in and of itself is kind of a public service on his part, because he's got to live with that stuff. It must be awful.
I think this is the exciting thing about his candidacy, and it was the exciting thing to me about Trump's candidacy. Yeah, I've never liked Donald Trump personally, but Trump is what got me started writing my political satire. Because yes, there was a wild card in the mix, doing exactly what you just described, and Bobby Kennedy's candidacy, is doing the same thing from the other side of the aisle.
Yeah.
And I think that in and of itself is fantastic. Just for the reasons that you just articulated, just to shine a light on the way that the monster behaves, the way the machine works.
Are those the cops outside your house coming to get you, CJ?
It is the cops, and hopefully they're not coming to get me.
That European police horn is it's different than every other police siren in the world, isn't it? That wow.
Yes. Unmistakable.
Unmistakable. Yeah, so just continuing on with Bobby, it's quite interesting. I think that's true. I think that's kind of the moment is more not about whether Bobby wins or not. I mean, in a way, I hope he does, but it is this onslaught now, and also watching talented people make asses out of themselves trying to get him on stuff they're not prepared to argue. Like, do we go after Bobby on the vaccine thing, or I think it was Crystal Ball who said, well, we're just going to park that for now, but you're pretty terrible. They don't know what to do with him. And, they know that the talking points from the establishment are that vaccines don't cause autism. And maybe they don't. I've always believed that they don't, but I used to believe that they did when everybody else believed they did. And now I'm going to relook at it. And his candidacy has made me relook at it because they're all like arguing, but not arguing. Right. So he's really exposing how even some of the better people are completely hopeless. Like he was on with Bill Maher in an interview I watched on YouTube. And Bill Maher was just kind of left in his seat nodding as Bobby repeated all of these sort of interesting factoids from his, huge brain. It's a very, very interesting phenomenon that's happening right now.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking as you're talking, it's just kind of another example of the limited hangouts and the manipulation of perception that I'm talking about. It's of course going after Bobby on the vaccine autism stuff is what the machine wants to do. But if you think about it, is this his major issue? Is this what his campaign is built on? Is he running a campaign where I want to be president so that I can outlaw all vaccines and forbid children from ever getting vaccinated? No, it isn't. You mentioned the failure of the media, and I don't see it as failure. I cannot perceive the corporate media, the mainstream media here in Europe. It's also the state media. I cannot perceive the mainstream media as anything other than this vast, Goebbelsian keyboard instrument. It's yes, there are still legitimate good stories that are being reported in the mainstream press, but more and more, it is simply functioning as the official propaganda apparatus of the power system, and it is doing this nakedly. Yeah, couldn't be more naked. Yeah, I did see. I think the thing that really got me thinking about this was a new New Yorker profile of Bobby, and the woman who wrote it does what everybody does about Bobby. They justify writing about him by saying, I'm going to expose him as a conspiracy theorist and a terrible person, right? You can't just do a straight profile of Bob because he's interesting and he has this incredible familial legacy and la, la, la. You can't do that. You gotta, and what's interesting is, and you should pull this out, there was a profile of Hunter Biden done just kind of before, or just, I guess, during when Joe Biden was actually running for office. And it was a cleanup on aisle 3 because they knew that Hunter was going to be an issue. Obviously, he's a druggie and a, well, whatever he is.
I'm not going to get into that, but you know,
a whack job. Could we call him a whack job?
Well, a whack job, and look, I'm in the addict community a few times a month, so I don't mean to criticize people for being addicts, but his behavior was disgusting, and he is a disgusting person, and he's also clearly, based on the latest information, I'm here with my dad. Why haven't you paid us off yet? I mean, what do they want? You know? It's almost comical. But there is a New Yorker piece you should read if you haven't, that came out just during the campaign, clean up on aisle 3. We know bad stuff is coming out about Hunter. So let's just do a nice kind of hagiography of Joe, and then we'll breadcrumb Hunter's issues in the most sympathetic way before everybody else gets to it, which is what they did. I mean, it was shocking. So to see the way New Yorker covered Hunter Biden's actual kind of criminality and all the other terrible services versus what they're doing to Bobby right now. I mean, it's night and day, you know?
Yeah. Well, Trish, talk to Michael Shellenberger about this. I'm not as knowledgeable about it as he is, but basically, the Aspen Institute held a conference and got everybody together, and it just before the Hunter Biden stuff came out, and basically said there's going to be some stuff coming out, and this is the way it should be covered.
Yeah, right. I'm not surprised at all.
It was coordinated. It wasn't an organic thing at all. People, when it was clear that the FBI couldn't sit on it anymore and that it was going to come out, there was coordination and coordination involving the media. About how this was going to be covered or not covered. And it was coordinated, and then it was orchestrated.
And this, just as a woman speaking, how else can I speak? I am a woman. But, the other thing about the Biden family that is kind of sticking in my craw today is how they're treating the wife of Hunter's kid, this stripper chick that he impregnated and has she's a toddler, a 5-year-old or something now, I guess. But she can't have the Biden name. The family's never met her. I mean, I will tell you something, honestly. I have 2 boys, grown men now. If one of them impregnated a stripper, I would still be nice to the baby. It's not. I would be grandma to the baby. I would never reject a child on the basis of my kid's stupidity, right? And the Biden family has portray themselves as this close family. They've completely written this child out. She's fighting for money, which he was not paying. I mean, it's disgusting, but they get pass after pass after pass. It's just, anyway, Aspen Institute, let me just throw this at you. So you know who else is on the Aspen Institute kind of informational, survey group besides Katie Couric, which is a joke? Prince Harry. He brags about it. Like, he's going to be Prince Harry, the grifter to end all grifters, is going to be helping them decide on misinformation and disinformation, right? What a joke. I mean, this is beyond parody now, right? They've told more lies than Henry Kissinger, these two. And they're being celebrated. I mean, they're not being celebrated anymore. I think they're actually on the way out. But for a minute, he was attending meetings at the Aspen Institute. It's just like,
sure.
Yeah. Beyond the grift. Yeah.
Yeah. It's what you're talking about is, it's power. It's, all these narratives, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, it's about controlling our speech. It's about controlling our thoughts. It's about controlling our discourse. It's about controlling, the public space where people share and hash out ideas. And that's all it is, folks. It's about tightening the screws and establishing control over what we can say and what we can think and what we can know. And so, of course, all of the key people from all quarters of power are involved in it. Of course they are.
Yeah. And you know what? What I want you to do, your next project, maybe with Michael and Matt, you got to write about Canada, because we are really losing our free speech. I mean, they're not even hiding it. They're not even trying to hide it. There's a bunch of bills. There's, I can see 11, C18. A trans extremist group is trying to kick Fox News off our cable. I don't care about Fox News, especially since Tucker's gone. But I don't want a trans group. And what's really interesting about the letter they wrote to the CRTC to hold hearings to get Fox kicked off completely misrepresents a show of Tucker. Let me just explain what happened. Tucker did a show after the shootings in Nashville where a trans person shot 6 people. That was the week after Kelly J. Keane was roughed up in Auckland and Billboard Chris was attacked in BC, all by trans activists, right? So Tucker does a show saying there's some violence erupting around the trans community, yada, yada. So this trans group writes a letter without saying any of those facts in it about the shooting and then the 2 protest incidents, that Fox News' Tucker Carlson is inciting violence against trans people by talking about how they are violent, right? I mean, it's just ridiculous. And so with a straight face, the CRTC, did they actually look at the show? Because I did. And it's not the way it's being portrayed, but it doesn't matter. The group is called Egali. They are funded in part by our liberal government. Fox News and Tucker in particular, this was before he was kicked off, criticize our prime minister, weekly, right? Like Tucker really has it in for Justin, which as he should, as any thinking person does. So that's how it works, right? They take a nibble here. They get a like-minded group here. There's strange political bedfellows. They fund people who will then want censorship of organizations that criticize them. It's quite bad here right now. And the key to it, if I may, sorry to rant about this, CJ, but I would like you to maybe put your mind to it, was when the protests in Ottawa by the truckers were shut down in that way. Right? That because what happened with the truckers was the legacy media did everything in their power to delegitimize them, and they were still raising money and doing well and staying peaceful. And I think that really, really scared our prime minister. And that's actually why they brought in the Emergencies Act and froze the bank accounts of people. I mean, Canada, we're losing the country. I mean, it's not a joke. We are actually losing the country. And I wonder how long I'll be able even to do this podcast. Right?
Yeah. You were suggesting that I put my mind to it, and actually, I'm going to turn it around and suggest that I hope I have a chance to put your mind to it. One of the things that I hope will come out of our convergence in London, if we can hold it together with all of our political differences and diversity, and come up with some kind of broad, declaration of our intent that can become an umbrella to unite people all over the spectrum and bring it in. One thing that I'm hoping will come of this is that we can connect with more people internationally, journalists and people who are following this. I don't consider myself a journalist, Trish. I'm an author and an entertainer, and I dabbled in some critical theory. But you're a journalist. You know a lot of the stuff that you were just talking about is stuff that I don't follow that closely. I hope that there will be an opportunity for me to bring someone like you in, who can feed all of this really important information about what's going on in Canada into whatever we become, call it an alliance or whatever it is, so that we're really sharing this information. People really have an international perspective on what is going on, how it's going on, and the details of it. So I hope that this project goes forward, and there's an opportunity to do that. And if it does, I'm definitely going to reach out to you.
Well, I'm grateful for that, because I think one thing you could even add to this list, which I'm going to mention, I know you're ill, so I won't keep you on too long, but but is the idea that the censorship now is being driven by informational sovereignty. That's what they're claiming. So, and that has always happened in Canada where, we're the mouse beside the elephant and we're inundated with American culture and TV and news. And sometimes we just like it more because it's better, mostly, sometimes not so much anymore, but it used to be. So now a lot of the censorship that's happening here is happening under this apparently noble idea that no, we have to protect Canadian content, so we have to monitor that, we have to do this and that. Like, that's the other part. And I don't know very many. I think maybe the UK is kind of like that too, where they're trying to preserve something, but they're actually using it as a censorious method to frighten people, right? Because I do shows globally. Like I have you on from Berlin. I have people in Australia. I do a lot of shows out of the UK because I feel that these issues are really global, and they're going to start punishing us if we're not doing enough Canadian stuff, which is just, scary. But I just want to go through these things. So you list in this article of yours about your trip to London. Thanks for going. We all are happy that smart people like you were doing this. I'll send Matt an email as well because I admire him and Michael deeply. But so the censorship, that's just, you can't say certain things. That's easy. And then there's sort of the official propaganda, which, that's a lot of it was exposed during the messaging around COVID, right? But then the other is criminalization of dissent. Explain to me how that has manifested itself in our current time.
Well, you're talking to it, Trish. They're trying to prosecute me for expressing dissent. Basically, there isn't. If you look at the facts of my case, there's really, I'm obviously not, a Nazi supporter. You can look at my work. I've got 30 years of work out there, in books and essays and my novel and my plays and everything. It's abundantly clear that I'm the opposite of a Nazi supporter. So what is this criminal investigation about? Why are they criminally investigating Roger Waters for performing The Wall?
What's he accused of? What's he accused of, CJ?
Same thing, and anti-Semitism, basically. I forget what the exact charges are, but relativizing the Holocaust or something like this.
Okay,
but it's also a criminal investigation. Sakarit Bhakti just went through a trial and was acquitted here in Germany. Same thing. Again,
and he's the vaccine guy, right? He's a vaccine expert.
Yeah, exactly. And and again, Julian Assange. He reported. He reported on what the empire was doing, and he's been sitting in Belmarsh for 4 years, and how many years trapped in the embassy before that, and they're trying to extradite him and put him in Supermax for the rest of his life. This is what I'm talking about. It's not just the demonization of dissent, but actually prosecuting dissidents as criminals, leveling criminal charges against us and prosecuting us as criminals for our speech.
And let me add to that, for the record, Tamara Leach and Chris Barber, our two trucker convoy leaders, are both still facing criminal charges. And as the lawfare grows in power, they're both being sued for $150 million or some stupid amount of money by the residents in Ottawa who didn't like the horn honking and were suffering microaggressions or some dumb thing. I mean, they're just trying to tie them up with lawyers' fees and fear forever. So the next time you're recounting that list, add Tamara Leach and Chris Barber to it, because they are also being punished criminally for dissent. So then
I will. Thank you. Yeah, there's another example. It's not just happening here in Germany. It's happening all over.
And so then the next one on the list was the pathologization of dissent, which we hit a bit, but just give me the kind of Cliff's notes on that.
Yeah, the Cliff Notes, I'll try to do it. I'm getting pretty good at condensing it all. It goes back to what I was saying about living in a world that is ruled by a single ideological power system. Right. Trish, you and I both grew up in a world where there was an ideological argument. People, on the left were arguing against people on the right and back and forth. And there were two ideological positions. There's only one now. Right. Sorry, and I'm sorry to all my Marxist friends where I came from, but it's been completely invalidated, and we live in a single ideology world, and that ideology is global capitalism. Yeah. When you are a global hegemonic power system, ideological power system, you don't have to argue ideology anymore. Right. So your political opponents are not political opponents anymore. They're just abnormal. They're just people who don't conform to reality. And this is why we're called conspiracy theorists and, science deniers and COVID deniers and all of these names. This is not a political argument, Trish, because Globocap doesn't have to argue with us anymore.
Right.
This is the point of pathologizing dissidents, and dissent ceases to be the other side of a political equation because the political equation is gone. There is only the dominant official ideology and deviations therefrom. And those deviations are pathological. That's the way we are cast. Yeah, we don't have little legitimate arguments. We don't have political positions. We're freaks.
Yeah, we're freaks. Well, and I believe that started. Maybe this is really self-evident, but that when I'm trying to remember when I first realized that anybody who was challenging the nonsense on the other side was called a conspiracy theorist, and that was like a really bad thing. It was like the worst. It implied all kinds of stuff. You weren't a critical thinker. You were kind of a nut. You were on the fringe. You're crazy. Yeah. And that seems to be when that started, because now, just getting back to Bobby for a minute, that is in the cut line of every article. Oh, we're profiling Bobby Kennedy, the conspiracy theorist, la la la. And it's an epithet that's it sticks to people, and it shouldn't be that. It shouldn't be a bad thing, really. If you're like, oh, was there a conspiracy? I don't know. There were conspiracies that actually happened in real life, right? Like the Kennedy assassination.
They're happening right now all the time. That's part of human nature. Tricia, it actually started earlier than that. If you go back, this is a point that I made years ago. It gets lost, but if you go back to the official narrative in the war. In the so-called war on terror, right? And suddenly the official enemy became the terrorist, the extremist. Yeah, and this is the beginning of it. Like I said, I go back and I track the history from the collapse of the Soviet Union at the end of the Cold War. Yeah. And suddenly the official enemy, it wasn't the commies anymore. Now it's the terrorists and the extremists. And think about those terms. What is a terrorist? What is an extremist? These terms don't really have any meaning. These are pathological terms. And an extremist is what? Is someone who conducts war irrationally, as opposed to the way we rationally conduct war. A terrorist is someone who kills innocent people, in a bad way, as opposed to the way we kill innocent people in a good way. In a good way, right? My point is, these terms, even if you go back then, way before COVID and way before Trump and all this stuff, you go back and you see the beginning of this pathologization of any form of resistance to the empire. A terrorist, what is the ideology of a terrorist? What is the ideology of an extremist? There is none. These are simply, like cancers in the social body. Right. And really, this is the point when I'm talking about the pathologization of dissent.
Well, and then the last one on your list is the manipulation of reality. Well, wow, we just lived through that for 3 years, didn't we? But give me some examples of what you mean.
I'll just give you some mundane examples. Every time I publish one of my columns, one of my consent factory essays, if you go and you search for it on Google, what comes up, you don't see you don't find it. But what comes up is one of those Google notices that says there's not very much information on these terms, and maybe you need to check with trustworthy sources. Are these sources trustworthy? And basically this message pops up and tells you, hey, don't search for this. This is something, bad or weird or wrong. Another example is what happened, was my experience on Twitter for over 2 years. For well over 2 years, if you went to the Consent Factory, my blog and as a Twitter handle, my satirical site, the Consent Factory, you couldn't see the tweets unless you followed me already. If you were a new person, you went there and you looked, you couldn't see the tweets because all the tweets were covered up with interstitial labels. And the interstitial labels told you that this content is age-restricted adult content. What does this mean? I'm a pornographer. If you imagine if you're some innocent person who's coming along for the first time and thinking, oh, CJ Hopkins, Consent Factory, let me go take a look, and you look and think, oh no, this guy's a pornographer. Wow. I don't want to read pornography. And Wikipedia is another one of my favorite examples. I mean, Wikipedia is such. There's the. Gestapo again.
They're coming in.
Wikipedia is such a spook shop, and we all use it. It's the first thing that pops up when anyone goes looking for anything. And I don't want to go on and on and on about it, but it's a spook shop, folks. It's full of intelligence operatives, and it's not reality. It's not neutral reality. It's absolutely curated and designed to present a specific view of reality and pass it off as a neutral reference source.
Well, they do the same thing. I mean, I'm sure should we just try? I'm just going to try before we go. I'm going to go to Wikipedia. I'm going to Google Bobby Kennedy. Let's see what comes up at Wikipedia. Let's have a little looky-poo here. Robert Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy Jr. Let's do that. Okay, here we go, Wikipedia. Let's see. Robert Francis Kennedy Jr., born in 1954, is also known by his initials RFK Jr., is an American environmental lawyer, politician, and writer who has promoted anti-vaccine propaganda and public health-related conspiracy theories. There it is. It's always in the first. Voila. I didn't plan this, folks. It's always in the first line, isn't it? Always, always, always.
Yeah.
And then when you go down to, he's promoted the scientifically discredited link between vaccines and autism. So we're going to take a look at that, people. We are going to take a look at that on this show. My mind has not changed, but my mind is open. And we're going to look at it. And I'm sure you've been following the Peter Hotez thing, which is hilarious, right? Another thing that has completely exposed how corrupt it is. Peter Hotez was on Joe Rogan, Bobby Kennedy was on Joe Rogan. Peter Hotez was criticizing his vaccine stance, and then $1.5 million or something was put in a pot to encourage Peter to debate Bobby on Joe Rogan. And the response wasn't, oh, I guess, I will appear and we will compare his data and mine, and then whoever shall win or whatever. It was, oh, I don't debate with, podcasts, and the whole power of the corrupt media then lined up behind Peter Hotez, who's been wrong about more stuff than most COVID so-called experts, right? I mean, walking past, his commentary on COVID from March 2020 is like being in a hall of mirrors. It's insane. But the media have lined up behind him because Joe Rogan and Bobby Kennedy are making them look stupid. I mean, it's really shocking. Just debate him. That's what science is about. If he's so stupid, you should win hands down, right?
Well, Trish, this is a perfect example of what I was just talking about in terms of the pathologization of dissent. Right? We came from a world where, just debate him because he's got, an amount of authority and he's got opinions and he's got, facts that he's looked at. And maybe he's wrong, but you debate him. And the way that we learn and grow as a society is through these debates. Right. Yeah. But that's not where we are anymore. This form of power that we're in, this nascent totalitarian form of power. And again, they're not hiding it. They're making it very clear. The message here is we don't debate dissidents. Yeah. We don't debate them. We call them names. Yeah. We call them crazy people. We call them, dangerous people. We call them harmful. We call them names, but we don't debate them because you debate equals, right? Yeah. That's who you debate. You debate people who have, a valid argument on the other side of an equation. And the point of all of this is there is no equation. There is only the reality that we assert.
And we do see that now. And I had an interesting discussion with this chap who's working with me on the film. And he said, well, why don't we get people on who disagree with our thesis? And I said, and it was actually a remarkable thing for me to say, do you think that Tony Fauci would actually grant us an interview? There's no way. He does not appear with people who have not been towing the narrative party line. But it's not just him. None of them do. Right. And on our side, too, like we kind of curate our shows because we can't get people from the other side. The other side doesn't have the people we like on. So we have these completely siloed information systems feeding different realities to people. I think our reality is the correct reality because we are thinking critically. But I mean, talk about inhabiting two solitudes in the world right now. It's unbearably complicated.
Yeah, and this is another thing that is mushrooming throughout the culture. Just the whole idea of debating opposing views. I keep using the word because I think it's the right word. It has become pathologized. So many people that they don't perceive their political or ideological adversaries as tennis partners, as someone to actually work out with, work out your ideas. I enjoy arguing. I used to enjoy it. I don't get to do it very much anymore. Right. But I enjoy arguing. I was just talking with a German journalist who I just met, Dirk Pohlmann, and I was saying, I come from a world where friends used to passionately argue with each other.
Yes, that dinner with wine.
Go out, we would shout at each other, red-faced, passionately disagreeing with each other, and friends, and remain friends, and we're more and more becoming a culture where that type of argumentation, that type of debate, that type of exchange of ideas doesn't happen because the other side is perceived as this malignant, threatening force that you just said it with the Hotez thing. It's like, oh my God, I sit down in the same room with Bobby Kennedy. God, he might infect me. He could infect the audience. With his ideas and words. And this is where we are.
Yeah, this is where we are. Wow. Well, look, I am so grateful that you came on. I know you're sick. And so I'm glad you did this because I felt it was important to bring attention to the conference in London. People need to know this stuff is going on. I like to be an optimistic host. I'm not optimistic. There's lots of stuff like this going on, not at that level. Look, Michael and Matt and you are heroes of mine, but I you know, what are you going to do? Right? The corporations run the media. They're not listening. And more than half the people probably in America and certainly here, we love to be censored in Canada. Oh my God. Don't care about it. It's not like there's going to be a citizens uprising about censorship. They think it's cool, because they believe the BS, oh, that's hate speech. Oh, it's Canadian content. Oh, I don't know. Just in closing.
I'm stunned, Trish, because I think I might actually be more optimistic than you in this circumstance, which would be so weird. Yeah. I try to remind myself, I try to go back to the 50s and the 60s and think about where I grew up. I grew up in the segregated South. I was born in 1961. I don't remember it much, but that's where I grew up. Yeah. Was a child all during the early civil rights movement and what have you. And I go back and I think about where people's views were then and how bad the racism and the prejudice and the segregation was at that time. And through sustained effort, it was changed. That those attitudes were changed, and it's not the same country anymore. Again, I just saw the Shellenberger speech. So Michael's in my head. He was making this point. We're at a point now where there is actually less racism and racial animosity than there has ever been in human history. I think what I'm saying, Trish, is that it looks really dark and we're up against a really big monster, but I still have faith in us, in the people. And there's nothing else to do but fight. There's nothing else to do but push back. There's nothing else to do but try to change it. It might take a while and it might feel like we're beating our heads against the wall for a long time, but there's nothing else to do. We have to do it.
Well, this is certainly a hill to die on for me, but I also will say this, as a mom, my children they're quite far apart in age, but both of them, even though there's that age difference, don't see what I see. They're enlightened now. They no longer think mom's a crank because all their friends listen to the podcast, which is hilarious. All these young men. It's great. Hi, young men who know my kids. Thanks for listening. But so mom's not a crank anymore. But I don't think these kids generationally, because you and I, CJ, lived in a time before the internet. This is becoming a talking point of mine. I might be the last generation of journalists who lived in the world before the homogeneity, right? We didn't have computers. We didn't have the internet. I typed on a Royal typewriter with an ashtray by my desk. We had to go out and cover stuff. We met the people we were talking about. We met the cops. We met the victims. We went to war zones. Nothing was digital. And it was a different way of relating to news. There was humanity attached to the information that we were creating, right? Digital news gathering, which has taken over the whole thing. It's why it's dying. It creates a barrier between the journalist and what they're writing about. And it also creates a barrier between the journalist and humanity. They're just sitting in their little work from home on my Mac, writing about stuff they never actually see. And so there's been a degradation in how we relate to each other, I think in part created by that. And so I'm sorry, I'm going on, but what I'm saying is I feel that the people who are coming up after us are less inclined to be as pissed off about it as we are. That's what I was trying to say in that long-winded way, because they never experienced the other way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't miss it. And they don't miss it. It's funny when I try to explain to I used to explain this to, young writers who were in my workshops. And, it's like, what we used to do? We used to call people at home, and the phone would just ring, and it would ring, and after so many rings, we figured, hey, they're not home.
Yeah.
and then we hung up. That's how old I am.
Yeah,
Same. Listening to your rant, and it's a good rant. It comes back to the thing that it's one of the things that really disturbs me to no end is walking around in the world and being surrounded by people staring into the screens of their phones.
Deadly.
And sitting together. I don't know how to begin. I don't know how to begin to address this. But when you started talking, it's what I thought about.
We got to get the kids off their damn phones. I'm deeply ashamed that my children are both addicted to their phones. Deeply, deeply ashamed that I didn't nip that in the bud. I didn't nip it in the bud. I didn't. And now I would say to any parents listening, get your kids' friend groups, parents to all agree to limit the cell phone use in a serious way. I know they say, well, the other kids have him. He's going to be bullied and centered out. Well, then get all the other parents to agree, because this isn't an issue that's even debated anymore. It's changing their brains. It's changing, yes, and it's making them less human, and they're distracted and they can't focus and they can't concentrate. Get them away from their goddamn phones. Get them off it. That's the first thing you could do as a parent these days, in my view.
Imagine that as a community activity.
Yeah.
Imagine all of the ripples that would flow from, people getting together in a community and saying, hey, let's all agree as a community, small town or whatever. Let's all agree that we're going to limit our kids, smartphone usage, and so that all of our kids have the same limits.
Yeah.
And then they could, think of not just the effect on the kids, but what it would do in terms of bringing that community together. And starting to interact more as a community. Anyway, I could go on. If I weren't sick, I could go on and on and on about this.
We will, because you know what? I have a plan in my head about taking small bites of the problem at a community level. And I talk about a Citizens' Bill of Rights where we demand that we ask politicians certain questions. Like nobody in Toronto, where we just had a mayor's election, we got the far left Olivia Chow, who I'm not going to say anything about because I know her, so I'm going to be nice. But nobody was saying, well, like, how do you feel about 15-minute cities? And are we going to, none of that's even on the agenda. So I feel that we could have in these small community meetings discussions like this about our kids and homeschooling and what to do about trans extremism in the schools and the questions we must be asking politicians and demanding answers from. I don't want to vote for people who are going to the World Economic Forum. Get out. We're not paying for that. And if you do go, you better give us a full report of what was said, right? Like they're not even having to answer any of these questions for us. So I feel that there could be a movement and that we'd all like each other more if we met in a church basement like we alcoholics do to stay sober, right? It's good for us.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. It's my sense whenever people, I never have an answer. I write all this depressing stuff and people write to me and say, well, CJ, what are we supposed to do?
What do we do?
For God's sake.
I know.
And my stock answer is, whatever it is, if it's going to happen, it's going to start with communities.
Yep.
It's going to start with people, with neighbors, with communities reaching back out to each other,
yeah,
and reforming as communities, reforming these smaller social bodies. And I really believe that's the beginning of it, Trish. Unless these really local community level connections get made, we're just going to be slaves of these machines.
Yeah, agree. Okay, CJ, you can have a Neocitrin and go to bed now. That's what Wow, what a great, I'm sorry, it was 2 hours. I didn't mean for it to be, but I could do 5 hours with you if you weren't sick. So that's good to end on a positive note. I am thinking about things I'm going to be developing for the fall just to give people a sense of hope. And I know it's true because I go to a lot of events where I'm speaking and people come and they're so happy to be together and not be around the sort of nuttiness of the other side. And it's very uplifting for them. So that's the key, is togetherness. And I believe in it very much. Anyway, thank you so much for doing this. CJ, people can find you on your website, which is Consent Factory. What's your Twitter name?
I've got two, and there's one that's just me, CJ Hopkins, that used to be just for my artistic stuff, and I tried to keep all of the political satire out, but it's all gotten messed up now because I'm so censored. Okay. So there's the Consent Factory, and there's CJ Hopkins, and they can find me. I've got a Substack. I publish all my stuff on the consentfactory.org, but I also put the same essays up on my Substack. And if you just stick me in a search engine, you'll find me.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Wonderful. Well, thanks so much. And I hope you're feeling better soon. And keep writing, and do keep us in the loop too. I'd like to follow this enterprise they've got going, this endeavor. I think it's really interesting, and I like those two guys a lot. So be fun to hear more.
I certainly will. I'll keep folks updated on that and on my case. I hope I don't turn into Lenny Bruce, reading, court transcripts verbatim on the stage. And Trish, it was a pleasure talking to you again. I was just going to sit around sniffling and coughing. So much rather have spent the time talking to you. So thanks for having me on again.
Well, a distraction is good, right? When you're not feeling well. So good. Okay, great. CJ, thanks so much. I'll talk to you soon, and please keep on going. We need voices like yours very much, so please do that.
Will do.
And we'll do a GoFundMe if you need a lawyer.
Let's see what happens.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye. So that was the great, the one and only CJ Hopkins. If you're not reading his stuff, you should be. He's terrific. And what a great stylist he is. What a great essayist and stylist. He's funny. It is very gonzo in the Hunter Thompson way. But, Hunter Thompson was sort of a jerk, truth be told. But he was a great writer, and he saw things very clearly. And sometimes when things are as crappy as they are right now, you need a writer like CJ who can spin some of it in a humorous way, because it's so huge that you can't absorb it. You need a little bit of sugar with the boys. And so he does that really well. Young kids who want to learn how to write essays properly should be probably reading CJ Hopkins regularly. And also, he's a study in critical thinking, so of course he's always welcome on this show. So you heard me talking to CJ and just generally on the show about Canadian media and what's happening around some of the censorship issues in this country. And there was a piece in the Toronto Star, I believe, or maybe it was the National Post, Post Media and Toronto Star owner in merger talks. Wow. So the Post Media, which is the National Post, which is a legacy media, but they do have a couple of interesting writers, including Rupa Subramanya, who was one of the heroines of covering the trucker convoy. God bless Rupa. And the Toronto Star, which is a nightmare of leftist ideological groupthink, one of the worst, maybe the worst newspaper in the world for their COVID coverage. They hated the unvaccinated. They ran full-page stories with hate speech, celebrating hate speech against us. They never asked anybody a hard question. They celebrated and demanded lockdowns. They were just the absolute worst. A shameful, shameful stain on the history of journalism in this country. Anyway, the Post Media and the Toronto Star are in talks to merge. So what would that even look like? There's hope for the National Post. My fear is that the Toronto Star is going to pull the Post to the left, not that the Post is going to pull the Toronto Star into the sunlight of truth, right? I don't know. But they're having problems. And like all the media in this country, they are all having problems. And they're having problems not because of digital platforms and not because the media landscape is changing. They are having problems because they suck. Why is the CBC losing viewership? Because they suck. Because the people do not trust them anymore. Because they are all infected with an agenda. All of them. All of them. So as the viewers and listeners and readers peel off, they become more and more desperate to assault the people who are doing the work that they should be doing, namely podcasters, indie media, Matt Taibbi, Michael Shellenberger, Rupa, me on a good day. They want to shut us down because we are purveyors of misinformation and disinformation. The more their readers peel off, the more they come to our side, the more they whinge and moan and complain, and they need more money from the government to survive. I have a quick, pay me as a business consultant, pay me the $1 million you pay McKinsey people, and I will solve your problem. Stop lying to people. Stop pushing propaganda. Start holding government to account equally. Stop demonizing blue-collar people as white supremacists and conspiracy theorists. Stop doing that. Stop it. And guess what? Your listeners and your viewers and your readers will come flocking back. I absolutely guarantee it. When your business model in journalism is censorship and propaganda, the people will rise up against you. They are voting with their dollars. And every pledge I get here to help this show keep going is a vote against what they're doing. That's what it is. That's how I view it. And every dollar that goes to Matt Taibbi or Michael Shellenberger or David Zweig or any of the other people who are, or CJ, who are doing terrific work, is a vote against them because they are not to be trusted. Sadly, look, I come from the belly of the beast. I worked in these places where they were doing it the right way. Christy Blatchford was kind of the last great Canadian reporter, in my view, because she was a contrarian and she wasn't captured by anybody. I fear what will happen with this merger, but a merger shouldn't even be in the cards. They should be, COVID is the story of our lifetime. If they'd done it properly, they would have become the paper of record on COVID. They'd be, rich again. But they didn't do that. They towed the Liberal Party line. They towed the vaccine party line. They insulted people who were vaccine injured. They insulted people who questioned lockdowns. It could not be worse. They failed. You know what? You know how they failed? They failed like the New York Times did in covering the troubles in Germany leading up to the Holocaust, too. There are times in history when the media absolutely failed the people. And that is what has happened in Canada and in Toronto, specifically around the Post and the Toronto Star. The Toronto Star massively failed. CBC, unbelievable, bad. Global, terrible. CTV, awful. So don't moan and whinge about going broke and how journalism's under attack. Journalism is not under attack. Bad journalism is, and you're doing it. So think about that. Think about it, because we do need a vibrant and robust journalism platform in this country. I'm actually thinking about how to put something together that would include voices from all sides that were credible. And I suspect the person who does that will make some money, because that's what the people want. They're tired of being abused by the media, right? They're tired of it. They exposed themselves absolutely around the convoy and around the COVID coverage they did. Just shockingly bad. So listen, folks, the cavalry is not coming. The legacy media is not going to save us, right? We got to figure it out on our own. And how you curate your information feeds is going to determine how well-informed your worldview is. So please think about those things. And if anybody in the legacy media is listening, to quote my mother, you should have thought of that before you started BSing everybody. Anyway, stay critical. See ya.